Thank you, Debbie.
Very nice job.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
It is. Item 4.3, resolution of the City of Emeryville as successor agency to the Emeryville Redevelopment Agency, approving the long-range property management plan regarding the disposition and use of property of the former redevelopment agency.
Good evening,
Helen.
Mayor, council members. Assembly Bill 1484 was approved June 27, 2012 as part of the budget, and it amended Assembly Bill 26, which was the Redevelopment Agency Dissolution Act. And among other things, Assembly Bill 1484 established penalties and incentives to have successor agencies comply with the audit requirements. And an incentive that's important is how it changed the process of disposing property. Previously, Assembly Bill 26 required successor agencies to dispose of property as expeditiously as possible with the intention of maximizing value. AB 1484 changed that so property is disposed pursuant to a long-range property management plan, which you're considering tonight. And Emeryville's deadline for submitting this plan to the Department of Finance is at the end of this month. The long-range property management plan governs the method, use, and timing of disposing all of the former redevelopment agency's properties. And it has to include a number of elements. And it has to include an inventory of all the properties. In this list you see here, all these points have to be covered in the plan: when it was acquired, how much it was worth when it was acquired, what is the current estimate of value, what is the purpose for which it was acquired, basic parcel data, if there's any lease or rental revenues, and a history of environmental contamination and remediation, potential for transit-oriented development, and a brief history of development proposals and activities. So it's rather a lengthy document. I'm going to try and go through it fairly quickly. An important characteristic of the plan is that it divides properties into 4 basic categories, which are shown here on this table: a government purpose use, enforceable obligation use, future development, and immediate sale. And the way that those properties are categorized affects how they're transferred to the city, what happens to them, and how the city collects revenue. So for instance, in government use properties, and that's really examples of parks, which we have a few, and I'll be going over those are that would then be transferred to the city and retained by the city and operated as parks. The enforceable obligation use properties are those that are subject to legally binding contracts or agreements. And in that case, they're also transferred to the city and retained by the city. The future development properties are properties that were purchased for a project identified in the redevelopment plan, and they would be transferred to the city for disposition and redevelopment according to that plan. And in this case, the city would retain the revenues from the sale of the property. The last case is immediate sale, is property not falling into any of those first 3 categories. Those properties would be proposed just to sell them at their highest and best use, and that's the case where revenues are distributed to the taxing entities. So Emeryville successor agency has 10 properties that are included in this plan. There's 7 governmental use properties, 1 property for the enforceable obligation, 1 property for future development, and 1 for immediate sale, and I'm going to go through them. This is a map that shows the location of these properties, so you can see that they're distributed fairly evenly throughout the entire city. A lot of them, the park properties, are on the Greenway, and we'll talk about that later, but you can see these are the park properties here. So speaking of parks, 5 park properties: Horton Landing Park, Greenway at Parcel D, Greenway at 59th Street, Emery Station Greenway Plaza, and 48th Street Community Garden. They'll be operated as parks. They're identified in the general plan and zoned as open space. And as I just pointed out, 4 of those would be incorporated into the Emeryville Greenway. So because they're all parks, they're assumed to have no commercial value. So the first park is Horton Landing Park. This site is located west of Novartis, east of Union Pacific Rail. It's 42,500 square feet. The redevelopment agency acquired it in 1996 for $463,000. It's currently contaminated, and this is an aerial showing the current condition of the site, and then you see here the plan that's been approved for redevelopment as the park. The next is Greenway at Parcel D. This is located at the western terminus of Sherwin Street at Halleck, east of UPRR, and it's 63,400 square feet, acquired December 2006 for $4.2 million. And its environmental condition is that it's been remediated, and we've seen it incorporated into a Thompson and Dorfman 2013 site plan, which is redeveloping the Sherwin-Williams site, and then this is the Parcel D site over here, which would be, in their plan, a dog park. The next property is Greenway at 59th Street. It's part of the Greenway system located essentially between 59th and Powell Street. It was acquired through eminent domain in August of 2010. It's 11,780 square feet. Approximately $500,000 was the fair market value at the date of the offer for acquisition, and it has been currently remediated. It's currently under construction as the Greenway up in here. Wareham Development's constructing it, and then it'll be operated, owned by the city. Then the next park is Emery Station Greenway Plaza. This is a point at the northeast corner of Powell and Hollis, which is has been developed into sort of an entryway to the Greenway at that location. It's approximately 4,000 square feet. The successor agency acquired ownership through an irrevocable offer of dedication and reservation of easements, $735,000 value, and it has been remediated. The next park is the 48th Street Community Garden, which is located on 48th Street in the Triangle neighborhood. It's planned to be redeveloped as a community garden, and this is a 2010 plan that was submitted with the state when we received a state grant to work on that project. Acquired it in February 2008 for $261,000, and it has been remediated. So now moving on to a different type of governmental use property, community facilities. We have one property there, the Art and Cultural Center, a 30,000 square foot, one-story unreinforced masonry brick building adjacent to City Hall, purchased in 2006 for the purpose of developing an art and cultural center. And the language on the slide here is from the implementation plan showing the purpose for which it was acquired. It has been remediated. The general plan identifies it as a public use, and it's zoned that way. So there's no market value to the site due to the public zoning designation. And these just show you the parcel map for the site. And the most recently approved site plan, Emeryville Center for the Arts in 2011, although that approval has expired. And now the Glass House Public Parking is another governmental use property. That's 50 public parking spaces on the ground floor of the Glass House condominium project. This was initially identified in 2005-2009 redevelopment agency implementation plan. The redevelopment agency purchased the parking from Pulte Homes, who developed it. And it's currently provided free to the public to support local businesses. This shows the site location and the layout of the public parking, acquired in 2008 for $2 million, and the site's been remediated. Next is the property to fulfill an enforceable obligation, and the property we have in that category is the Amtrak public parking. So we have enforceable obligations to provide 125 parking spaces for free to Amtrak patrons. And this list here is a listing of the 3 enforceable obligations that relate to that site. So there's a 97-year sublease with Emory Station Associates for the Amtrak parking on the site, and another lease for the Amtrak station, which says that, and a sublease with the National Railroad Corporation that says that Amtrak will be provided this parking. And lastly, the June 2012 Transit Center Parking Funding and Sublease Assignment Agreement, where between the city and the successor agency to actually fund and build the parking structure. So you're all familiar with this site. This is the Mound site, so it's just north of the Amtrak station, and this shows you the transit center plan for the ground floor of the transit center on that site. 1.58 acres, acquired in 2000 for $1, and its estimated value is 0 because of the free Amtrak parking, and the site is currently contaminated. So now moving on to the properties for future development. There's one property in that category, South Bayfront Site B. And the purpose for acquiring and developing Site B was to achieve the 1976 redevelopment plan and 2010-14 implementation plan objectives, which are listed here. Essentially, to develop a commercial and residential development to strengthen the economic and employment base of the city, provide a greater residential market, address and alleviate loss of tax base and jobs. And it's clearly stated that this site needs to be a continuation of the existing Bay Street mixed-use development and would serve as a northern cap for that project. So this is a parcel map showing the site. It's approximately 3 acres. It consists of 5 parcels purchased between 2006 and 2010 for almost $16 million, exclusive of the environmental costs. Estimated current value based on an August 2012 appraisal is $13.9 million, and the site has been remediated. So the last property is property for immediate sale, which is what we call the Shellmound Street lot. This is basically a remnant piece from early acquisitions by the redevelopment agency. The intent here would be to sell this piece as is, engage a broker to sell it, all cash sale. The proceeds would be distributed to the taxing entities. The estimated worth is anywhere from $1 million to $2.5 million. This is a parcel map showing that property. It's 25,756 square feet. We initially acquired it, estimated to be about $515,000. The environmental condition, it has a deed restriction on that restricts the use to commercial, office, or industrial. So basically, when the Department of Finance approves the long-range property management plan, all of the properties listed here would be placed in a community redevelopment property trust fund, and they would be disposed of according to the disposition plans appropriate to each of the uses. And the 2 revenue-generating properties, the property for future development, when that is disposed of, the city keeps all of the money from that property, Bay Street, and the property for immediate sale, the Shellmound Street, those would be distributed so the city would get its share of that distribution. So that concludes my report. We're recommending that you as the successor agency approve the long-range management plan. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Helen, I have a question for you. Refresh my memory about the property on Christie Avenue where the Public Works is now operating out of. What's the situation with that, and why isn't it on this?
That's city-owned.
Totally city-owned.
It is city-owned.
So the Gov can't jump in on this at all.
No, because the Department of Finance and the Oversight Board did not recognize either the obligation or the asset as being, or I should say the obligation that we maintained, they didn't recognize it as an enforceable obligation, that being the loan agreement between the successor agency and the former owners. So, and that would be the loan trust, and I forget the other name of the trust. And so what
There's
happened...
no chance that the DOF can come back and
No, so they
take another
haven't. They
bite.
did not recognize it as an enforceable obligation or asset of the successor agency, and so, as part of the due diligence review for the low mod housing fund, they required that 1.5 million be repaid to the successor agency because that was the amount of the down payment that the redevelopment agency had made on the purchase of that. So the city funded that, and then likewise there have been 2 payments due to the property owners, the former property owners, I should say, and the city has made those payments. So all the funding for the acquisition of that has come from the city. The Department of Finance has not recognized that obligation or that as an asset of the successor agency. So it's, and the title is in the name of the city, so it's a city asset, and so it's not on here.
So at the present time, are we making plans to move forward with some kind of development there?
Well, we're going to be bringing that to a study session to get direction from the city council
Okay.
about what you want to see happen on the site.
Okay.
Other questions from council?
Yeah, I have a couple other questions. When you talked about the last, the 10th parcel, which is the Shell Mound Street lot, you said that $515,000 was what we paid for that. And I'm curious if that amount covered the larger parcel. I see a larger outline here, and I'm not sure how the parcel was originally defined. I know that the red outline section is what remains after part was given to Caltrans for widening of 80, someone's to B Street. So the original outline are the gray, kind of somewhat trapezoidal shape. Is that what cost $515,000?
No.
No.
The red outline piece is the portion, the $515,000 is attributable to that portion.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what I did is I took the total purchase price that we paid and then came up with a per square foot price and then applied that to the remaining and came up with $515,000.
Okay. Yeah, I noticed, I wasn't able to do all the calculations myself so quickly, but the per square foot price varied wildly, it seemed, from parcel to parcel throughout the city. That would be an interesting exercise sometime to
Also,
look at this.
given the time, so you're looking at about maybe $20 a square foot there, and whereas Site B, when we were acquiring Site B, we were up in the range of 130 a square foot. So,
okay, thank you. And then there were 2 other sites that did not have any money amount associated with it, and one was the Art and Cultural Center. It said there's no value because of the way it's zoned, but what was paid for it was not given to us on the slide.
Okay.
Do you know what that is, or if there's an amount associated with that?
I think it's 2.1 million, but that's just.
I feel like it was somewhere in all of the pages I read, but
2.65. It's on
okay.
page 45 of the property management plan, which is 178 in your packet,
Okay,
but it's $3,650,000.
Million.
thank you. Okay, thank you very much. And then the second one with no value was the Amtrak public parking, 125 spaces. And I understand that's of no value because we have to provide this and it's only good for that purpose. But again, isn't there some value that could be attributed if the Glass House 50 spaces, for example, was said to be valued at $2 million? Why is it that we don't have a value at all associated with the Amtrak?
It was purchased for $1. So,
Okay.
Basically we were
That's
buying...
not a market-based value, though.
Well, in that it's just a surface parking lot and that it's provided free to Amtrak. So the Glass House parking is a structured parking lot that you're buying, so it's a lot more expensive.
Yeah, but $1 still, it doesn't capture the market.
Well, there's no market value because there's no revenue. It's all free parking, and so if there's no revenue, there's no value to
But
it.
the land still has some value, does it not?
The $1 relates to what we paid for that interest.
I just thought each parcel was supposed to have some value it says estimated current value for this one. This one's for immediate sale, so I understand it has to do with the market conditions.
The value of land is associated with the amount of revenue it can generate. So if it can't generate any revenue, it's not worth anything. Same with the parks. Parks have zero value. They don't generate any revenue.
Plus, you couldn't sell that property because of the toxic waste that's there. No one,
That's right.
You can't get funding for it.
Okay, let me put it another way. Those 125 spaces are going to cost something to build in a structured lot. Is there a value associated with that? What the cost of that
Yeah,
parking
but
will be to
that's
provide?
not what you're valuing here.
Okay.
Because that's not what the interest that we're looking at is this sublease interest for 125 spaces, and the only thing that you obtain out of that is the right for surface parking. So you can't assume that anything's going to be done with it in terms of its valuation right now, because all that exists right now under that sublease is the right to 125 surface parking spaces.
But it takes land to provide that, and land is worth something.
Right, and you were looking at the $1, and that's essentially what we paid when we acquired that interest in that sublease back in 2000. And then going forward in terms of what is it, if we were trying to sell that on the open market, given its restrictions and given the conditions of the site, our belief is that it doesn't have any value from a market standpoint, because you have this obligation to maintain it and also an obligation to provide that parking to the Amtrak patrons, because it's subject to those obligations.
I see your point. I guess I still think that 125 parking spaces should have some value, even if there's not revenue and I know what it costs to build a surface parking lot, and
Sure.
It's more than nothing. So I guess you're saying there's no, I just thought the purpose of this exercise was to assign some kind of a value, and you're saying it has no value because of the obligations to provide it free of charge.
What is the current market? If you were trying to sell this on the market, what would you get for it?
Okay.
Our belief that given the restrictions that are placed on it, on the spaces, is that there isn't a market for it.
But if they were
because all
gone, it would cost quite a bit to provide that.
But that's not what you're buying.
asking
What
for.
you're buying is this sublease interest, and you have these obligations to provide it to Amtrak.
Right.
And so
It does cost us something, as we saw earlier with the maintenance agreement.
it does.
Okay.
And so perhaps that's
It's
why
a negative value.
Right.
Well, I mean, the spaces are essentially made available to Amtrak. To the extent they aren't utilized by Amtrak, then they can be utilized by members of the public. So to the extent there is any sort of revenue, it's probably just sufficient to offset what your maintenance expenses associated with it.
Okay. Does that mean we're getting that revenue, or we're not getting that revenue?
Currently, no, we're not getting the revenue, and we're not maintaining it.
Okay, it's Wareham that has that contract. Okay, thank you.
Helen, have any other successor agencies already submitted their long-range property management plan, and how has that process gone in terms of what has DOF responded with?
Well, I know a number have submitted them. You probably know
Do we
more
know,
of the current
Mike?
situation.
Trying to remember, I just saw there was an email the other day. Only a handful have been approved. There have been numbers that have been submitted. I know city manager and I were talking the other day about the city of Oakland. They had submitted theirs in July, and they still haven't heard anything back.
Oh, okay.
Oh, boy.
So
Okay.
there you have it.
All right. Thank you. We have anyone from the public that would like to make a comment at this time?
Move the resolution.
I have one last question that I forgot to
Go
ask.
ahead, Jennifer. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Helen. On Site B, where it mentioned the different activities that I think were as part of the economic development, I recall reading about affordable housing being called out specifically, and I didn't see that in your presentation, and I wondered if there was maybe that was just a general statement from the implementation plan, or if I can't remember the origin of it exactly. I read a lot of pages, but
I can respond to that.
can you respond to that? Thanks.
So one of the obligations with respect to South Bayfront Site B and any parcel that a redevelopment, or I should say a city receives from a successor agency for future development, is an obligation that when it disposes of that parcel to a developer, that it has to make certain findings regarding, I forget the correct term, but if I can find it here. Apologies. Yeah, that there's will assist in the creation of economic opportunity.
That was it.
So this is a new provision that was enacted by Assembly Bill 470, and it went into effect January this year. And economic opportunity is defined in the government code, and it provides that it includes projects that create affordable housing, are included in a sustainable community strategy in accordance with Senate Bill 375, or a transit priority project as defined in the Public Resources Code. So those are three sort of ways by which you can make a finding that this project will assist in creation of economic opportunity. There are some others as well in the statute that I didn't lay out, but those were three that just sort of played out. And so to the extent the project provides for affordable housing, you will be able to make that finding of that the site's providing economic opportunity. Likewise, the with respect to sustainable community strategy, the whole city, essentially the entire city is in a priority development area, and that's sort of forming the basis of the sustainable community strategy. And then likewise, with respect to it being a transit priority project, you have to be within a certain distance of a transit stop, and
Major
certainly the
transit
Amtrak station qualifies. So the point I was making in the report was that what is planned to be developed on that site in terms of what was anticipated in the redevelopment plan, what's in the implementation plan, what is also allowed for in our current general plan and zoning, is all entirely consistent with being able to make those findings. So I think we're, as I say, the zoning and the general plan is conducive to be able to make those findings that are now required.
Okay, and I have one last follow-up, I'm sorry, on that I noticed, and this is something I've come across in my day job, which is the major transit hub, which you mentioned. The definition, it says in our packet, a quarter-mile radius or a 10-minute walk, and I had a hunch that maybe it should be a half-mile radius and a 10-minute walk, but that may be something where else that's
where are you
defined.
reading half mile?
I'm looking on page 34 of 92, but I saw it in 3 different places. So maybe that's a minor detail, but I wasn't sure that generally the 10-minute walk is associated with a half mile and a 5-minute walk is associated with a quarter mile.
Yeah, that's coming out of
That may have come from another
our
document.
general plan. So maybe
Oh.
Charlie can speak to that as to whether.
Or I could follow up on it later, too.
Yeah. But I believe as defined in the Public Resources Code, is what constitutes. I believe
Okay.
it's a half mile.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's a half mile as well.
Okay.
All right, thanks. I'm done.
I have a question about that infamous hole in the ground in Christie that PPP has been looking at for years. That's not,
That's a housing site.
okay,
So the housing sites were transferred to the city already.
got it, okay.
Affordable housing site.
Yeah.
Okay, so Nora moved the
I'll
item. Did you
second it, too.
second? Kurt, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Can I just clarify that you were moving the plan? I had provided some revisions to
With
the
the
plan.
revisions.
The revisions.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
Mr. Biddle, would you like all this paper now?
Sure. Make paper airplanes.
Okay, and with that, that meeting is adjourned.
Wait, there's no legal expenditures or?
We haven't had a meeting.
Okay.
That'll be next Tuesday, the Oversight Board will meet. So now we're on to the green agenda. This is the Emeryville